This one goes out to the overthinkers. Why do I then picture Careless Whisper playing? Surely it would be I Care a Lot Whisper. Have you ever left a conversation completely certain that the person you were just talking to really dislikes you, or at least dislikes you a bit? Because I have, because I'm quite insecure. Shocker. You feel like you came across weird, or you express yourself awkwardly, or you are actually a terrible person, and why would anyone like to talk to you? Well, research suggests that you're not alone in that, but also that you're wrong. Good morning, everyone. I'm Soph. These are my insecurities, notes. And back in 2018, this study described something called the liking gap, aka the gap between how much someone likes you and how much you think they like you. And in short, it suggests that when we come away from social interactions, sometimes with strangers, but even with people we've known for a reasonable amount of time, we're unnecessarily harsh on ourselves. The people that we've spoken to like us more than we thought they did. And apparently it's been doing the rounds on TikTok, but I actually saw it via Stylist magazine because obviously I'm so stylish. But I thought this was a good opportunity to take a look at the study, talk about how they actually did it, talk a bit about the results, do a bit of analysis, and discuss what it means for social interactions. And my main aim really was to give a bit of reassurance to any of the anxious socialisers out there. I wanted this to be a bit freeform. So it is. Hopefully I'll get all my points across, but yeah, let's have a chat. So what this study did is they explored the liking gap across 5 different experiments, and each experiment kind of segmentally added another finding on. So study number 1's job was just to find out if the liking gap is even a thing. So what the researchers did is they recruited people to sit next to each other in a room and have a 5-minute conversation. The fact they were sitting side by side, literally sitting next to each other, really threw me off because I feel like I prefer to have conversations face to face. And I went on a date once with a guy, I know, big surprise, who I sat down and then he chose to sit next to me even though there was space opposite, and it really threw me off. But maybe some people prefer to sit next to someone else. Tell me in the comments your preference. Maybe it's like a neurodivergence thing, like if you'd rather not look in each other's eyes and stuff. Anyway, they sat next to each other and they were given icebreaker questions to ask each other. Things like where are you from or what are your hobbies. And then in front of them they had a clock to keep track of time. After 5 minutes the experimenter came back in, was like, right guys, you're done, get out of here. And then the participants were asked questions separately about how much did you like your conversation partner and how much do you think they liked you? After the people in the study answered these questions, they were debriefed and dismissed. And basically it was found that there was a significant gap, a significant difference between how much people were actually liked and how much they thought they were liked. Also, just remembered, they looked at different personality traits and it was found that the only personality trait that kind of traced with the liking gap was shyness. So that's interesting. The more shy you are, the bigger your liking gap. Now, a couple of things to note, a little bit of cynicism to sprinkle in here. It was a pretty small group that was studied. There was only 17 pairs of people. There were originally 18, and then it emerged that one of the pairs was already friends. And I kind of love it because you were paid $10 to do the experiment. So there's just 2 people that rocked up, chat to their mate for 5 minutes, got $10 for it. Got $10 for it even. Work smart, not hard. Work friend, not stranger. And it's not really a surprise that there ended up being 2 people who were friends because this was all based at Yale, the university. And so obviously that's another limit of this study, that it's a very specific group, students from Yale. But despite those kind of slight issues, it did present something that was worth exploring further. But before that, we have experiment 1B. Yes, it's in 2 segments, this first one. So whilst this screen in front of them had been showing them a clock so they could pace themselves, it had also been recording them. We need that little I can't do that noise, that shocked anime noise. How sus. The people had consented to having their videos analysed, guys, so it is okay. Why? Because the researchers in experiment 1B wanted to try and work out why there's a liking gap. Is it because we don't show how much we like people when we talk to them, so the other person can't pick it up? Or is it because we're showing how much we like someone, but the other person just isn't reading it? They call these 2 things the no signal account versus the neglected signal account. So they got these trained coders to look at recordings of these conversations, which now makes sense why they were sitting next to each other. then I was like, okay, it was so they could be recorded at the same time. But again, speaking of it being quite small numbers of analysis, we've got 17 videos left to analyse. 2 of them had technical difficulties, so now we're left with 15, which is again not a huge number in scientific experiment terms. But still, what was found when watching these 15 videos, people show that they like the other person, that they like their conversation partner, you know, smiling, like laughing, that kind of stuff. But the conversation partner doesn't pick up on it. And this matches up with the neglected signal hypothesis. So that was study 1A and 1B. Now we're on to study 2. What this was trying to do was to understand whether the liking gap exists because of our own negative thoughts about ourselves. There was 84 people looked at in this study, so a few more than last time, but still not huge. They were still recruited from Yale, so it's still a bit niche. But what was different about this is they didn't have a conversational scaffold, so they just had to talk about whatever they wanted to talk about for 5 minutes. No icebreaker questions were given to them. And I feel like this leaves like way more space for the liking gap to appear. I feel like you're surely more likely to be insecure about what you're saying when you could be saying anything, right? And sure enough, even though it was still quite a small group, even though it was still a niche group, the liking gap did appear again. So the liking gap being confirmed, tick, that's a positive thing for the research at least. So the second thing each person had to do is after the conversation, when they went to their separate rooms, they were asked to give 3 core moments that they think impacted how much they were liked by the other person, and 3 core moments that impacted how much they liked the other person. And after doing this, the participants were debriefed and dismissed. Then those moments were rated on like positivity and negativity, and essentially it was found that people were far more negative about themselves than they were about their conversational partner. And the more negative they were about themselves, the bigger the liking gap was, i.e. the bigger that gap between how much they thought they were liked and how much they were actually liked. Now maybe this feels obvious, but maybe it just feels obvious because it plays into a narrative that you already have. But it's quite useful to have this as data in a research sense. So after 3 experiments, 1A, 1B and 2, we have evidence the liking gap exists. It looks like it's because we don't notice the cues someone is giving that they like us, and it's also potentially because we have a lot of self-directed negative thoughts. But these have all been 5-minute conversations. So study 3 wanted to investigate if the liking gap persists when you talk for more than 5 minutes. And the answer is yes. So this experiment was actually part of a bigger experiment that was looking at things that predict conversation length. So they could afford to give participants a whopping $15 each, rather than the 10 they'd been giving before. What they did is they got 2 previously unacquainted people. It specifically says that in the methodology. I feel like the scientists were burnt by those like 2 mates in the first experiment who just like took the tenner and ran. And yeah, again, people were sat down. I think this time they were sat opposite each other. So yeah, in my notes it says this time they sit face to face, huge change in method. And in this experiment, people were recruited a little bit differently. They were recruited from, God, I can't say that word. They were recruited from the Harvard Decision Science Lab, I think it's called, yeah, which supposedly includes people from the general public. But again, I think it's quite a specific subset of the general public who would be linked to the Harvard Decision Science Lab. These people were sat down and they were told they could chat about whatever they like for between 1 minute and 45 minutes. So we're really ramping up the potential awkwardness here, because you're gonna have a conversation. It might go on for a long time. You're not sure. You might, you've got a lot of time to overthink, a lot of things to overthink as well. After having a chat, people were asked some questions and then they were say the line, debriefed and dismissed. So let's have a little look at the results. We had 102 people in total take part in this study, which is again a slightly bigger number than before. That's positive. And of all the pairs of conversations, they lasted from a range of 45 minutes, the full time, to just 2 minutes, which again, I kind of love that energy of like, yeah, are we done here? Are we done here? I think we're done. We could talk for another 43 minutes, but why would we? And with the 45 minutes, I'm picturing like a meet cute situation, like they're just talking, it's flowing so naturally, and then they get split apart by the experimenter. That is a film I would think about watching. Anyway, a relief for the researchers, a liking gap was seen, so there's more evidence that this liking gap is a thing that exists. And no matter the length of the conversation, whether it was 2 minutes or 45 minutes, the liking gap existed throughout different lengths of convo. Now, conversation length predicted how much the people liked each other. So the more people talked, the more they liked each other. But that liking gap in how much each of them thought they were liked was still there. which is interesting. Okay, we are on to, looking at my laptop, study 4. I don't need that. I don't need my laptop to count. So these studies so far have specifically investigated the liking gap in Yale students or recent Yale graduates or people who are signed up to the Harvard Decision Science Center. Is that right? Something like that. And also, these experiments have been done in solo rooms, in labs. It's just unnatural. So for this experiment, they went to a far more natural setting. The UK. Not only the UK, but specifically a how to speak to strangers workshop in the UK. This is surely going to be representative of a general population. And long story short, they found there was a liking gap in this group as well. Now, I get why they did this experiment, obviously, you want to expand it out to the general public. That's been a kind of underlying criticism I've had of this paper. It's a very niche group. But I guess people who would attend a How to Talk to Strangers workshop are also quite a niche group, and probably people who are already quite low in confidence about their conversational ability. So they're people who are probably more vulnerable to having a liking gap. So it's interesting that the liking gap was found in a different group, but again, it is quite a niche group. And we're on to the final study, study 5. So I guess there were actually 6 experiments because 1A was split into A and B. But now we're into study 5, the final one. And I call this one, and they were dorm mates.
Oh my God, they were
dorm mates. Because yeah, we're back to Yale, and this experiment is about seeing if the liking gap persists over the course of a year. Yes, it seems to happen when we talk to strangers that they like us more than we think they would. But what about someone who you've known for months and lived with? This study was another piggyback onto a longer term study, which means they really whacked the cash out for this one, right? There were so many financial incentives, and it'd be boring for me to go through them all, but they were visited several times through the year, and the money was things they got paid X amount for doing the main set of studies. If they did the final one, they got another $85, and they were put into a raffle for another $100. It just was I was like, this is real money. This is real money. Cha-ching. But the reason they said they put so much money in at the end was to basically sweep up any delinquent participants who hadn't been doing their thing, which is fair enough, just throw cash at the situation. So yeah, they were looking at dorm mates in Yale, and this wasn't just people who shared a room, it was people who were in a dorm, so sometimes there were bigger groups. And I didn't know this, but apparently dorm mates aren't picked at random. They're kind of, at least in this case, they're combined based on preferences, how tidy they are or how early they go to bed. Maybe that's just Yale, but here it's definitely not like that. First year accommodation is just randos just chucked together. You can be with the kind of people you would just never ever think you'd ever hang out with. That's the joy of uni. But yeah, what the study found was that the liking gap continues throughout the year. The only time it really closes is right at the very end of the year. And the researchers hypothesized that this is because people are having to have open conversations about how much they like each other, because maybe they'll live together next year and stuff like that. Also, because this study seemed to have so much money in it, they did a little thing where they financially incentivized some people to be as honest as they could with their answer. So they were basically the person who's most accurate about how much people like them will win a prize. And that was a way of seeing whether people are just being humble or not. What they found was that offering people money didn't make their answers any more accurate, which suggests that people are telling what they believe to be the truth the whole time anyway. So I've done a little rundown of all the different experiments, and I've done this very free form with my chat, so I hope I can edit it in a way that makes sense and isn't boring. But to summarise, there is evidence to show that people like us more than we think they do. We possibly don't read how much people like us because we don't see all the signs they're giving out that they like us, and we possibly have this negative interpretation of ourselves because we just have negative thoughts about ourselves. It seems like this liking gap can last over different lengths of conversation, and it can even persist over quite a long time. But I found after this study, I still had quite a lot of questions after reading it. I wanted to look into what other research there was out there. Because the big question I had as well is what about different types of people? There are some people out there who I feel think that everyone loves them and people don't like talking to them. Kind of people who are a bit more arrogant or whatever. Just because I'm approaching from that angle of someone who is quite insecure doesn't mean everyone is, So I wanted to, see what the studies had been done. And funnily enough, when I finished that 2018 paper, I read the acknowledgements, and there was a name that I recognised, which was Adam Mastriani. Now, he's a guy who he's done some really interesting studies, and he has this Substack, which is really cool, called Experimental History. I'll link it below. But also, we actually did improv together at uni, so I know him. And then when I looked up more recent studies, I found this one about the liking gap in groups of people, and sure enough, he's the one who wrote it. So there we go, that's me admitting my conflict of interest. I'm not going to do a full analysis of Adam's paper, sorry Adam, I'm just going to walk through what the findings were. Basically, this one looked at the liking gap in groups of people, so rather than just pairs. So it's quite an important shift. And it also looks at the liking gap in working environments, another important shift. Another thing to say about this paper is that the numbers of people counted are a lot bigger. So we've got like 416 in one of the studies, 312 in another one. But in this paper, the most shocking thing of all is that people weren't debriefed and dismissed. They were dismissed and compensated. Wow. I don't know if I can handle the change. The first part of the study showed that in groups of 3 strangers having a conversation together, you think, one thinks that you are the least liked of the 3. So a liking gap exists not just one-on-one, you're liked more than you think you are, but also in a group. We think we're the least liked of the group, even though we're not. Like, someone might be thinking, well, there's got to be a least liked in every group, but it's more complicated than that, right? And even then, even if you were the least liked in the group, you think that that's a much bigger gap than it actually is. Now, they then did some experiments looking at workplace situations. So they looked at groups like of engineers talking to each other, and then they looked at groups from different workplaces talking to each other. Now, in a workplace group setting, it isn't the case. You don't necessarily think you're the least liked in a group, but the liking gap does still exist. You think that people like you less than they actually do, and it persists over time. There was no difference in the liking gap between people who'd been working together for less than 6 months and people who've been working together for more. And the problem is, when you have a liking gap in a work situation, it can stop you from asking for help or communicating open and honestly, or even just feeling part of the team. And these things can then have an impact on like how well you will work together. So it's funny, isn't it? Because I feel like often with like scientific studies or psychological studies, there's always a part where it's like, here's how it might impact the economy, so that people who are like very like economy minded will pay attention. But this is kind of that part of that. The liking gap may make us all less productive, guys. Nightmare. Imagine not being able to be productive because you're insecure. Stop being insecure. Maybe that's what bosses all do now. They'll be like, guys, I'm sensing a lot of insecurity in this workplace. You need to get over it. Another thing I found really interesting in this study is that they looked at how the liking gap exists in different relationships. And basically what they found is that the liking gap exists when you're peer-to-peer, so when it's 2 sort of people at the same level interacting. Each person thinks they're liked less than they are. But if you're talking about supervisor-supervisee interactions, the liking gap doesn't actually exist in any significant way either way. So the supervisee doesn't think they're liked less, the supervisor doesn't think they're liked less, which is weird, right? Like, hierarchy somehow like removes that, maybe because you're not bothered about being liked. So that's quite an interesting thing. And other interesting things it brings up is like the self-fulfilling prophecy of the liking gap. So if we think someone doesn't like us, we may be less likely to reach out to them or make conversations with them, which then in turn will make us think that they like us less because they might reach out less, but it's also going to make them think that we like them less. It's all just complicated, isn't it? And it's all rooted in us overthinking. So why do we have a liking gap? Why are we so wrong about how much we're actually liked? Well, it's a bit of a weird one because there's a lot of evidence out there that we humans generally are a bit overconfident about things. We generally think that we're like way better at things than we actually are, from like driving a car, or as this paper calls it, a motor vehicle, to how good we are in a couple or in a marriage. So what is it about conversation that makes us insecure? There's a few different theories for this, but basically first impressions really matter, right? There's evidence to show that people make first impressions so quickly from all sorts, from how you talk, how you look. And so because we know that these first impressions really matter, that puts more pressure on a situation. More pressure. There are other things too, like we also want to improve. And so when we think about a conversation that we've just had, we're kind of more likely to bring to mind mistakes we made or what we perceive as mistakes so that we can improve them for next time. Like, ooh, I could get to that punchline quicker, or ooh, I could like say that more succinctly, or I could make that funnier, or I missed out this key bit of information. So we're basically reanalyzing our conversation with a negative spin to try and improve it, which then makes us think that our conversation was worse than it was. Another thing is that we hold ourselves to higher standards than we would hold strangers, because we have access to all of the conversations we've ever had, right? So if I have a conversation with someone, I might be like, oh, you know what? I really wasn't as charming as I was last week when I had that conversation. And so every conversation we have, we're comparing it to this like idealized version of how we can be or how we want to be. Whereas the person we're talking to is just taking it in that moment, / mainly thinking about themselves. So they're not gonna notice how, fraught you were in that moment. Which then ties us into another theory, which is that we think we show our negative emotions way more than we actually do. There's so many cases where you think that you're like really anxious and you're coming across like really awkward and whatever, but actually you're not doing that in an outwardly perceptible way. And again, it's especially not perceptible when the person you're talking to is so ensconced, encased, enwrapped in their own thoughts. Essentially, we really overestimate how much our feelings are actually on display in social interactions. The holding yourself up to high standards is quite an interesting one as well, because even though we hold ourselves to quite high standards conversationally and can be quite self-critical, we actually have quite low expectations from the people we're talking to. I feel like in the paper it says the word dismal, which feels quite harsh. But so even though we're holding ourselves to these high standards, if we have a conversation and it isn't rubbish, we're like, great, that was great, or at least that was better than I was expecting. And so we're more positive about our conversation partners because we were expecting so little than we are about ourselves from whom we expect so much. So in summary, one of our greatest fears is how we are evaluated socially. And so, it makes sense that we are really on edge when it comes to how we talk and, whether we are being weird, basically, or perceived as being weird. But what are my final thoughts and what is the point of this? Well, the point, let's start with that, is that I think it's really helpful to know that this perception exists, or that this misperception, I should say, because it literally happened yesterday, just before I filmed this, well, not just before, a day before. I did an interview for a podcast, and I came off so anxious that I'd been weird or came across badly, blah, blah, blah. And maybe this is a case where actually the person I was talking to didn't really like me very much and I read the situation right. But thinking, just letting this research put a little drop in my brain of well, maybe you're overthinking it and maybe they liked you more than you think, did help to calm me down. So yeah, the point I think is that it would be nice if we were a bit less harsh to ourselves. My doubts still exist in the realm of does this exist for everyone? But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people who externally seem very confident and cocky and arrogant actually inside are oh no, everyone hates me, I'm really insecure. I also, was limited in the amount of time I gave to researching this video. So there could be studies out there that specifically look at the liking gap in finance bros, which is the kind of thing I would be interested in. But even though these studies are very specific populations, there's been enough repeat evidence of the liking gap that it's definitely an interesting prospect to consider. But on a more personal note, I feel like doing this research made me reflect a bit on my friendships, because I think I have been in the past the kind of person who has not been afraid to put herself out there. I've, made initial contact, I've made plans, I've basically pushed through feelings of kind of awkwardness with just well, may as well ask this person if they want to hang out. And the response is always so positive. I can only think of one example of someone who I've met at an event on a one-off, chatted to, been let's hang out, let's go for a coffee, and where they've ended up pieing me off. And that isn't in a showing off way. I just think that people want those clear signs of I'm interested in befriending you far more than we realise. We're all scared to put ourselves out there, but we also wish that other people made those moves. And so yeah, it sounds really basic, but I think if you assume that people are nervous rather than being cold, I think it kind of helps. Those are just my thoughts though. That isn't scientific. But this has been a bit rambly because I wanted to film it without a set script. Please do like this video if you like it, share it if you share it, subscribe it if you subscribe it, media my socials if you want to do that, and comment with any thoughts that you have about the liking gap. Also comment if you feel like it's better to sit next to someone or opposite someone. Otherwise, all that's left to say is thank you so much for watching, have a lovely day, and remember, you are now debriefed and dismissed. Thank you so much to my patrons for all your support, and I know that I say this at the end of every video, so it sounds like a little rushed thing, but my thanks are so genuine. For everyone who gives any money on my Patreon, you are so kind and so appreciated. Also, hello, Droven Pooslius, there you are, I see you. I'm never gonna dance again, cause I'm convinced that everyone hates me. Eating turkey is not associated with Halloween, although it probably is if you're a turkey. I feel like I can't say Yale without it sounding like the ugliest word ever when it comes out in my accent. Yale. What a low N number. Boo. Hiss. Hello. Oh, jeez. Oh, what a time. What a time. I bet when people get into Yale, they put a caption being like, Yale. It's like the engaged thing for like queer engagement. Yeah, this is plenty. I've not even finished my coffee. Bye. I hope there's good things. It's the end screen. And I like you more than you know. It's the end screen. And it's time for the video to go. Okay, that's it. Bye. Well, I should explain what this is. It's a playlist of videos I like of mine, a video I've selected for you, and a Patreon link if you want to support me and my channel financially with some perks thrown in. Okay, bye.